Hi everyone, welcome to another SEGI webinar series session brought to you by SEGI Group of Colleges. My name is Eva, licensed counselor and lecturer with School of Psychology, SEGI College, Subang Jaya. I'm the host for today's session. Welcome to this live webinar titled The Mentalities of Mental Health, brought to you by SEGI Group of Colleges. So before we begin, I'd like to do a quick tech check. Can everyone hear me and see me clearly? Type yes if you can see me and hear me clearly. Just another round of tech check. Type yes if you can see me and hear me clearly. So just looking at the comments to ensure that everyone can hear and see us. Okay, great. I think we are set to go for the tech check. So quick briefing. For those of you who've just joined in, I welcome you once again to this live webinar titled The Mentalities of Mental Health. My name is Teva and I will be your host for today. A quick briefing to everyone before we start. Our session today should take approximately 60 minutes. During this session, we encourage you to type your questions in the comment section below, and our speakers will try to answer your questions during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar later. So we would also like to inform everyone that this webinar is recorded and will be used by SEGI University and colleges and its subsidiaries in the future. Before we proceed, can everyone type in the comment section and share with us where you're connecting from? Because we understand that there are registrations from all over Malaysia and other countries. Do share with us where you're connecting from, because we do have speakers from Australia and US today joining us for the session. So hopefully, we get to know you where you're coming from. Thank you for sharing with us. We will begin now, and I hope everyone is ready to start our webinar. So if you're ready to start, press 1, type 1 in the comment section. Are you ready? Type 1. We're going to begin soon. Great. We are ready to start our session, and I'm going to introduce again our topic for today. Right, so today's topic is Mentalities of Mental Health, and our speakers are Ms. Farhana Muna from Munetic and Project Arna, and Ms. Nancy Bartos from Hope Travels. Ms. Farhana is joining us from Australia, where it's past 10 p.m. there, and Ms. Nancy is joining us all the way from Chicago, where it's really, really early. So thank you so much to our speakers for accommodating to our timing for this webinar today. Now, before we start with the speakers, I would like to provide you some background on our speakers today. So Ms. Farhana has founded Munetic. It's a comedy show. She's a comic herself, and also Project Arna, which means not anymore in Bengali, to be a voice for Bangladeshi women who are victims of domestic abuse. She's very passionate in advocating mental health, awareness, and female empowerment. Her social media activism has also privileged her to work with UN Women in Bangladesh and was a guest speaker at One Young World Summit in London. Now this is just to name a few of her activism and advocacy work. Now our next speaker, which is our second speaker for today, is Miss Nancy Bartos, and she is an educator and founder as well as a writer at Hope Travels. Now this Hope Travels movement comes with the tagline, "It's okay not to be okay," which is something we need to hear from time to time. She created Hope Travels movement to engage in conversations about mental health within the comfort of our own collective adventures near and far. With collaboration from global partners while traveling to different countries, Nancy supported many projects, including painting numerous murals, planning community events, and presenting outreach workshops. Now, Ms. Lancy was with us last year at Sagi College Subang Jaya. She collaborated with us to create the beautiful Hope Wall that we have put up at Daman Mall Subang Jaya. I'm sure some of you might have seen it before. So that was a great experience for me as well. Yeah. So without further ado, let's start with our speakers. Okay.
Good morning.
Welcome, Miss Farhana and Miss Nancy, to our session today.
Good morning.
Morning to you and good evening to Miss Farhana. Yep. So how are you guys today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Pleasure's ours.
Thank you, Teva. Really glad to be here along with Nancy.
How about you, Miss Farhana? Great. Thank
Really?
you so much. Today we'll start with basically today's session is sorry?
Sorry, Teva, you were cutting out. Apologies. I think there was a bit of
okay.
Please continue. Go on.
Right. Okay, no problem. So, right, today's session is going to be more of a conversational style, not much of a presentation style. So, I hope the viewers would, would enjoy this conversation and also benefit from the conversation that we're going to have today, because we're going to talk many things on experience, because many times we talk a lot about prevention, but we don't really dive in much on experience, because real things happen. We are real people and real things happen to us. And I think, and I believe that me as a licensed counselor provides a form of release and empowerment, and listening to other people's story, gives us some form of connection, gives us some form of relatability, right? So we're not the only one that's going through this. So mental health is a journey, and it is something that we need to be actively involved in. Now, I'm going to start off with Ms. Farhana. Ms. Farhana, would you share with us your experience in regards to your own mental health?
Sure. So my mental health journey started when I was in high school, and I knew that as a kid I was always quite sensitive. I was very emotional. I would have mood swings, but I was just sort of as the black sheep of the family. And then from high school all the way to university, I started getting really bad mood swings. I started getting very depressed. I would act out. I would have very of harmful behaviors, and I started getting very suicidal and self-harming. So everything, all of that was brushed off by my family and surroundings, by teachers and everyone, as she's just being a typical teenager. So no one really talked about it. No one, not a single person who knew what I was going through could suggest that I should be a professional. And on the other hand, to make things worse, I was deeply stigmatized and ashamed, because every time I would have an episode, as my parents would call it, it was brushed off or stigmatized as being, being too dramatic, being attention seeking. My mother's quite religious. She always thought I was possessed, and trust me, she sent me to a lot of priests to get exorcised.
Because that's so all this labeling was happening. All this labeling and
Absolutely. I was labeled crazy. Again, as I said, attention seeking. And then I came to Australia, and obviously things kept getting progressively worse, because what's worse than feeling depressed is you feel guilty or ashamed for feeling depressed. And you're caught in a vicious cycle, right? It makes it worse. And so it continued throughout university as well. And in uni in particular, I remember that extra pressure did not help at all, because the culture I come from, Teva, there's a lot of emphasis on grades, and, grades are beginning and the end of your life. Everything you do and your worth as a human being is the grades, and then the job and the house and the car you drive. So pressure just made it even worse. And ultimately,
Yep.
things escalated to a point where I was suicidal. I was extremely anxious. And in a way, the silver lining of that was the fact
Mm-hmm.
that it finally pushed me to get the professional treatment that I should have gotten ages ago. And that
Okay.
path to recovery. And
Mm-hmm.
now looking back, this was back, my last attempt was in 2015, my apologies, 14 or
Okay.
15, something like that. And since then I've been on a massive journey of healing, whether it's meditation, whether it's going to see a psychologist for CBT.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm on the other side of the main recovery,
Mm-hmm.
I am now, a passionate advocate and trying to share my story so that I help ease some of that stigma and shame that unfortunately a lot of people attach with mental illness.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Farhana. I mean, listening to what you've gone through, I think that's just the surface of, that's basically just a summary of what you went through. But being in those moments of being depressed or being rejected, being labeled, being called names, maybe sending you to different kind of treatments at that point of time. Could you share with us a little bit more in a little bit more detail, a little bit more specifics of what went through your mind or how did you start feeling at that point of time?
Yeah. I had no frame of reference because mental illness. So I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, and then I moved to Bangladesh. So,
Okay.
whilst it's Bangladesh and it's Malaysia, I would imagine Southeast Asia to have very similar cultural,
Yeah, we do.
attitudes around mental health. And honestly, I think it's universal. Some have it more, some have it less. So there
Mhm,
was never, ever, no one ever talked about mental health or mental illness. And the only context or situation in which mental illness was used was the
mhm,
that mental illness means someone who belongs in an asylum and who's getting
mhm,
electroshock therapy. That's it.
mhm.
Um,
Right, right.
the only
Mhm.
extreme. And Bangladesh, as it is, even today, it is heavily, heavily under resourced for when it comes to frontline professionals.
Resources. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think for every 100,000 patients, there's 0.07 psychiatrists.
Wow, that's yeah.
100,000 people. So that goes to show how the government and the society values mental health and the urgency of it. So to go back into that time, I was lost.
Mhm,
I was
mhm,
helpless. I felt so ashamed because
mhm.
everyone kept saying one thing: get over it, get over it. It's your fault. And so I was
Yeah.
looking at this invisible switch somewhere in my head, and it didn't
Mhm,
exist. I thought it was my fault. And the other thing that compounded the problem was the attitude was quite dismissive in the sense that I came from a middle class family. I had food on the
okay.
table, going to
Mhm,
school. What do you
mhm,
have to be depressed about?
mhm. Yep.
Um, so now that I look back at it, it's a form of gaslighting, right? You're questioning your own reality. You feel like you're the
True.
problem. And in order to cope with that shame, I acted out. I acted out because I did not know what to do with that trauma.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
eventually, when I got to Australia and I started my healing, it was only then that I found out that a lot of that was connected to my childhood and things that happened
mhm.
to me when I was very young. And that's
Okay.
something that nobody talks about, the fact that childhood has a critical impact on your
Mhm. Yeah.
mental health as an adult. And in fact, 50% of mental illnesses form before the age of 14. So even without knowing, my parents were bringing me up, whether it was a language they used, whether it was a style of discipline or punishment or pressure that they put knowingly and unknowingly. Unfortunately, it was really, really harmful for my
Yeah.
mental health. I had
Yeah.
extremely low self-esteem, very low self-worth. I would
Mhm,
constantly depend on external validation. And in order to feel like I'm worth something, I would just constantly be chasing grades and then a better job and a better promotion. Upon
mhm,
the I look like that really obedient Asian kid, brown kid who's doing her parents proud, working in a good bank, having a good salary, bringing in all the grades. The
mhm.
internal reality was very different. I was miserable. I just did not know who I was, and it was, as I said, a vicious cycle. So
Yeah.
that's how.
Right. That is a tremendous, traumatizing, excruciating experience for a child to go through. I mean, you're older now, and that's you're able to relate and reflect and analyze and find the support that you need. But I cannot imagine for a child to go through that and not being able to have someone identify with them, saying that, hey, this kid needs help, not stigmatization, not criticisms, not being shunned away, not being labeled as dramatic, and so on. That is, I think a lot of us can actually, most parents can actually learn a little bit from your story here, because sometimes when children act out, when they're throwing tantrums, when they're rebellious, when they're saying something that they don't want to do, and they're being forced to do a lot of things, and there's, like as you mentioned, the stresses of education, the stresses of future, all that put together, that is tremendous stress a child will go through. On top of stress, yeah.
Yep, and I think the other thing, Teva, that compounds this problem is, especially when you're in university, that's that added pressure, because you're already trying to figure out your life, your future. You have to take all these big decisions, and there's so much pressure on you. And unfortunately, I don't know if this is only a cultural thing, but especially where, in the parts of the world that we come from, you ever raise or speak up about anything with your parents, their usual default reaction is they get very defensive. They think, what have we ever done to you? And you're making this about you. You're doing this to us. They don't get that depression and anxiety and mental illnesses in general. It's not personal at all. They're a disease. A broken is not, it's not about you. High blood pressure, it's not about you. Diabetes is not about you. And depression's the same.
Yeah, it's seen in a way that it's just like how the other illnesses or the other diseases can just go away with medication or treatment, but depression and mental illness and mental conditions are completely different. They need, especially when you have been put in a place where you've not gotten treatment for too long, and you've been exposed to these extremities for too long, it's going to take years of recovery. I believe that there are times, even today, as you've grown so much, as you've learned so much, you're doing advocacy work, but even today, I believe that there are some bits and pieces that causes some form of triggers or some form of emotions that you might go through from time to time.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So, people ask me this all the time, that, so once you get cured, do you ever get scared about relapses? See, anyone can get depressed or anxious or any kind of mental health problems at any point, just in the same way anyone can get diabetes or high blood pressure or, a broken bone. So you can't be in that constant fear, because I remember one of my therapists said that most human beings are just one incident away from a nervous breakdown. So it's just about that trigger and what happens to you. So you can't approach that from a fear. That's not really empowering. And the other community attitude that I'm trying to change through my work, Teva, is people think that going to a mental health professional is the last resort. It's only when you're in depths of, that's the only time I can get therapy. Absolutely not. In fact, that should be a first resort, because if you can start the conversation early on, rather than, as you said, let it fester and compound, then that could potentially save you, a lot more struggle. So definitely community attitude that holds us back.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest challenges that we have to deal with within, when it comes to mental health and within communities. That goes back into families, because communities are stigmatizing mental health. And then the families are thinking, oh, if my child or if myself, I'm seeking help, I'm seeking a therapist, I'm seeking a psychiatrist, now people are going to look at me differently. People are going to label me, people are going to do this, people are going to do that, because at the end of the day, we do live in a society, right? I mean, it's a social connection that we have with each other. So even if the connection in itself is not positive, it's not encouraging, it's not empowering, how are we going to move forward from the stigma and the labeling, and be able to be not to be able to come out of that shame of, oh, having mental health is shameful, it's it's limiting, it's challenging, it's going to stop me from having opportunities, right?
Absolutely. And I think what unfortunately happens in our societies, even when a celebrity commits suicide, I see the whole matter of mental illness, it's sensationalized into like a piece of taboo gossip.
I agree. Yeah.
It's exactly like, oh, do you know that person has depression, suicide? Oh my God. And it's like gossip. I'm like, That's exactly that sense of shame, and as you said, labeling, Teva, is what really just perpetrates all these negative attitudes.
Exactly. Yep. No, I will agree with you when you said that most of these mental health conditions, they start from young. They do start from childhood. Me being a therapist as well, I've seen my clients, many of them have tested all these different kinds of conditions, or even anxieties and depressions, because of those things that they went through as a child. And parents are not equipped enough, or they just disregard these things, and they just say, you know what, I'm giving you everything, I'm giving you this, I'm giving you that, why can't you just see that, and why can't you just be normal, for that matter? Why do you have to go through this? Why is it about that, right? What is not enough? So those are the questions that sometimes make people run away from wanting that help, or asking for help, because the more you ask for help, the more it seems like as if you're attention seeking, or you're doing anything else except for what you're supposed to do. Now that's one thing, and that goes back into, of course, cultural, the cultural tendencies. Our parents have been brought up before this, and the awareness, the lack of awareness, and of course the stigmatization that comes along with it. And as you've mentioned, mental health conditions are not just limited to schizophrenia, or those kinds of things where you really need to go to, that's already on the extreme, on the other extreme, on the other
Yeah.
end. Yeah, so like, as you, and also as you've mentioned, I totally agree with you, mental health help or treatment should not be the last resort. It should be the first line prevention, because you don't want to get worse from where you are. You want to be able to start learning the coping and the strategies that you can put forth for yourself.
Yeah, there's 2 points that I think are really worth calling out here.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, another community or family attitude that I find, Teva, is if suppose the parents by any chance do acknowledge what the child is going through, or what a
Mm-hmm.
family member is going through, one of the
Mm-hmm.
popular suggestions is that, oh, talk to your friends, go for a holiday, go do some shopping, or talk to me and you'll
Right.
feel. Depression and anxiety are very different from just having a bad day. They're clinical conditions or medical conditions. So the same
Yep.
way you're talking to a family member or going on a vacation is not going to cure your diabetes or make your blood pressure right. It's the exact
Yep.
same concept for depression and anxiety. They need professional medical intervention. So that's the first
Exactly.
like to call out. And the second, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this, Teva, is we
Mm-hmm.
have to remember, because it's very easy to get angry and frustrated at our parents, because obviously the natural expectation is that our parents understand us at our darkest.
Mm-hmm.
But when we don't get that response, it's very easy to feel enraged and, if
Neglected, and yeah.
parents don't get me, then what's the point? But
Right.
here, the key message that I remember throughout my recovery, because I had no family support, not a single person understood me, no one was by my side when I finally got treatment, was the fact that your parents are probably also from a generation where mental health and the concept of it did not exist. They too are conditioned to not understand
Mm-hmm.
as a very real thing. And the other thing is, traumatized parents will raise traumatized children.
Correct.
They themselves can only provide support to the extent to the extent that they themselves recognize mental health. So if they do not have the skills or the knowledge or the awareness to cope with their own mental health and look after their own mental health, chances are they probably can't do it for you either. You can't give what you don't have. So these are the 2 points that I'd like to call
Exactly.
out.
Okay, thank you so much, Farhana. That those 2 points are really, really, those are very important points. It needs to be highlighted, and it's not highlighted enough. Yep. As parents, if you don't know what to do with your child or what to do with your children, and you're trying to understand, because you're trying to break out from the stigma and you're trying to break out from the cycle of what you've learned, you could always refer yourself to professionals. There are so many professionals around, and they're not being highlighted enough. Resources. And also, one more thing that I would like to put on top of that is that the government, the communities, they need to recognize the importance of licensed and professional therapists, not just simply anyone. Like Farhana mentioned, it's not just about talking over a coffee or going for a vacation or something like that. Yeah, a vacation can fix a bad day, but a vacation cannot give you coping strategies, but rather it gives you escapism. Escapism is just another negative strategy to escape what's happening with you. That's one of those things that people tend to do, and sometimes it creates dependency. And there are so many layers, and there are so many factors when it comes to mental health, especially when it's not addressed properly, when the right treatment is not provided at the right time, especially. Yep. So I want to move on to Miss Nancy right now. Miss Nancy, you're an educator. You've worked with a lot of people before. You've worked with young people majority of the time. So what about your personal experience or your experiences? From your experience from these when you're engaging with these other young people and population.
Great, thank you. So I see my own mental health journey having two tiers, right? So when I'm listening to Farhana, I can probably better relate to your mom, right? Because when we were raised, there were never conversations like this, which I think are essential and critical and important. But we just didn't talk about mental health, right? And I even think back to my own history of traumatic experiences that I would have with friends and family, where we would have these very hard things happen. And the next day we would put on our face and go on like nothing happened. It was just very typical for how we interacted. And so as an educator, I am working, as all of us do, with our family and friends. But I think as teachers, we're often working with this wide variety of mental health relationships, right? Because we have some students who are very comfortable and able to talk about mental health, and we're addressing that and working and relating. And then at the same time, we have others who have no exposure, no experience, and even really don't know how to put into words what they're feeling or thinking. And so for me as a teacher, coming from this generation where we never discussed it, and we just did say, get over it. You're being dramatic. All of those things that you were saying, I could totally relate to, and have probably even said them, which just, is very cringy right now. But so suddenly as a teacher, I became very aware that, all of the things that worked in the past were not working. And that as more influences and more information and students were equipped, and even friends and family were equipped with more information, I had to do a better job of understanding mental health and the spectrum of how to interact with people in ways that bring this comfort to talking and destigmatizing conversations about mental health. So that's one of the reasons I'm so happy when we have this multi-generational communication. Because I loved when you mentioned, Farhana, it's not that people are trying to harm you when they're responding to mental health in ways that seem unhelpful or in fact even harmful. It's that they don't know better. And we like to think that if people know better, they'll do better. Because in many cases, the things that you're hearing that are unhelpful are still done in love. And so I think as we equip people with more information, the dialogue's changing. We're rethinking how we interact with the people we love the most.
Correct. That is absolutely true, Nancy, because as you mentioned, I want to highlight this tough love. It's so much, many things happen around this tough love. I love you, but I want the best for you, but this is how I mean, it's not conscious, but this is how I'm doing this for you. I want you to get out of it. So I'm pushing you out of this space that you're in, this darkness that you're in. I don't know how else to help you, but this is the best way for me, I think, to help you, to get you out of this place. Now, I'm not just talking about parents with their children, but also sometimes within partners. And sometimes we want to dig in deeper a little bit more, and we also want to look at organizations, and we also want to look at workplaces, because mental health not just necessarily means an individual thing at the end of the day, because it's a collective thing. Everybody plays a part in ensuring that mental health, the mental health conditions are met, that everyone functions with good mental health. But unfortunately, there are still environments, sometimes within organizations also, that does not help with the whole mental health situation for people. Now, what do you guys think about that? Do Nancy or Farhana want to go for this one?
Good. So, I think that often what you mentioned, like places where we try to be helpful, we're not helpful. But for me, I think it's just really been learning some very specific strategies, right? And I don't know if you find the same, but I feel like that's been really valuable and productive for me for how to engage in these discussions and dialogue. I don't know if that addressed what you wanted, but feel free to re-clarify.
Sure, no worries. Miss Nancy, I do want to go back to what you've mentioned when it comes to young people and when you're in school, in your educational area where you've mentioned. We'll come back to the other question after. So, but we'll go back to this to education one first. So now, when you're engaging with younger people, right? You say some of them are expressive and some of them don't know how to express these emotions or their conditions that they're going through. Now, how do you elicit? Now, the ones that can talk, it's pretty easy to get them to talk. But the ones that don't talk or don't show much of, they don't show signs of they needing help. They try to ignore it. They try to run away from it. Now, how do you go about those kind of people, young people or students?
So I think there have been some really dramatic changes in my interactions with students. I think number one, that we've all seen that teachers have this sort of, and I'll say the same, parents, right? Sometimes we have this perfect face that we put on and we walk in every day, and no matter what has happened to us on our way to school, no matter what we're facing, we have this idea of game face, right? And what I realize and what I encourage for parents too is that sometimes being an example and talking about our own mental health in ways that are age appropriate on a regular basis is critical to encouraging our students or others in our families to talk about their own mental health. So for me, I always would walk in and say, today's a great day. It's amazing to be here, right? And it became very unrelatable. And even with students that I've mentored more intensely, that they just said, like, you're always happy. You're always, things are always great for you. And sometimes when I say some of the things that have happened in my life, it's shocking to them because I've never, ever, I had never mentioned any of that, right? So I've become much more willing, not to overshare, certainly, and to do it in ways that are, appropriate for my class or where I'm working or my setting, but to be more willing to say, I'm a little bit out of sorts today. I'm not feeling well. And boy, today's really a hard day because then how are you feeling? And I think that encourages more dialogue that's authentic. And I just really feel authenticity has to be our goal.
Yeah. So being genuine and being authentic, even when we don't feel like it, it's a tendency to say, I'm fine, it's okay, nothing, we're just brushing things off. But to be authentic and to be genuine actually shows that, hey, I'm human and I can't be okay all the time. And hence it's okay not to be okay. Nancy, with your Hope Travels, right? So it's okay not to be okay. There are times we won't be okay. There are times we'll feel terrible. There are times we feel great. And it's important for us to acknowledge these things. Even as parents, I would always say to parents, when you are going through tough times, it's best for you to tell your children that, hey, I'm going through tough times. So you're going to see me having ups and downs, but it does not mean that I am weak. I am able to show you what I'm going through, but at the same time, I'm also looking for resources. Now, this provides, in a way, it creates resilience for your children as well, because they see you being authentic, they see you being genuine in whatever circumstances that you're going through, and they recognize that, hey, this is part of life. So I don't need to be ashamed if I'm going through some downtime. I can be this way and still be useful, still be finding resources to help myself. So I think, like what you've mentioned, Nancy, that conversations are very important, even if you don't come from a psychology background, or even if you don't come from a counseling background or the therapy background. As just being part of the community, we can start these conversations with one another and say, how are you doing today? Today was a crazy day, but I did this and all that. Sometimes I feel down, but otherwise, asking each other how they're doing and allowing that space just to listen and not trying to interrupt or fix anything, just basically just listening to to each other. And that actually to talk more about the listening part, Segi College Subanjaya has actually initiated a sidewalk talk project, um, given the banner "You Talk, We Listen." So we have this particular campaign ongoing. Basically, what happens is that we train our students to do listening, to basically provide a space for just anybody to just sit and talk and give them that space that to listen, because listening has been one of the most important things, and I think it's missing in our society nowadays, because we just don't have time for each other, right? We text, we send Instagram stuff, and we do everything online now. Everything is going online, but we don't have the time to listen sometimes. So yeah, that is one of those things that I think is very crucial, as Miss Nancy mentioned.
I would say, and I think that one of the things with this multi-generational conversations is that what I realize is that we're always giving advice, right? Like you mentioned, hundreds of people, I'm sure Farhana gave you advice, but not many people just stopped and listened. And I think that's where the wall gets built, where you start to just stop, you just stop talking.
Yeah, correct. You just cave in, you just put up walls, and you know what? People are just giving me this and that, but I just wanted to express, I just wanted to vent myself, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Farhana, if I may ask you this question, I mean, you're also with a MNC and all that. I'm sure with your project and with your advocacy work, you've probably also heard of people in general, despite the gender, mental health at the workplace as well, right? It's not just about the families at the end of the day, but it's also, basically within our environment. Now, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
Absolutely. And I think, look, Nancy and Tiva, you both covered the problem in its holistic sense. The only other thing that I'd like to add is, along with authenticity and being an active listening, what I feel is an essential component of us progressing mental health and changing the status quo is a level of vulnerability. So having the courage to be vulnerable, as Nancy so brilliantly talked about, that it's okay to say, you know what, I'm actually not feeling that great today, or I'm feeling a little low, or I'm struggling with a few things, whilst respecting, personal boundaries. So I think vulnerability in the workplace as well is very powerful, because very often, whether it's our parents, whether it's our boss, whether it's ourselves, we project ourselves into this perfect role that we need to fit. And anything outside it, we don't feel safe to be seen and heard in that manner. So I remember, many times when on my bad mental health days, where I just want to stay in bed and I don't have the energy to get out of bed or do anything, my concentration is lacking, I'm just having a bad day. In the past, I would constantly just tell my manager that, oh, I'm feeling under the weather, I've got a tummy ache, or I've got a cold, because it's easier for a line manager to grasp that than saying, oh, I'm feeling a bit anxious, or I need a day of self-care. Then, however, I reached a point where I'm like, you know what, I need to practice what I preach. And if I don't change the dial on my story, if I still carry shame or fear in some way or the other, then how am I going to make it safer for the people around me to say, oh, well, now that Farhana's kind of had the courage to say she's struggling with mental health, or she's a suicide survivor, or, person who's recovered from anxiety, then maybe it's safe for me as well to come forward and be honest about it. So I remember someone told me this, that courage is contagious. So I remember I was having a really bad week. I had a few things going on in my personal life, and I was calling my manager, and I had a script ready in my head, like, yeah, I was just going to tell him, like, I ate something funny and I was had gas or something. And then I said, nah, I'm going to have a moment of courageous vulnerability. I'm going to be authentic. And I acknowledged it straight away. I told him, I said, so his name was Nathan. And I said, Nathan, I was actually going to tell you a lie about why I'm not coming to work. And but I'm really, really scared. But I really want to tell you the truth. The truth is, for the last week, I've been really struggling with my mental health. I don't have energy. I'm struggling to focus. I can't concentrate. My mood is a bit all over the place. And I'm really, really nervous telling you this right now, because I'm really scared that you might judge me. You might think I'm not a good employee. What if this jeopardizes my future employment opportunities and whatnot, because you don't want to be called crazy person in the office or at school, right? Exactly. And my line manager, he went quiet for a little bit, and he said, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for trusting me with that information. And now the fact that you've said that, let's work together. Tell me how I can support you.
Wow,
so
great response.
to what your, Nancy and Tiva, you both said, and again, through my advocacy, on a monthly basis, I talk to hundreds of people who write to me about their mental health journey. 90% of the time, they just want to be listened to. They want to be validated, and they just want someone to say it's okay to be not okay. What you're feeling is real, and you can recover. I am a comedian, and I'm standing here doing comedy and doing the things I can do and having a very fulfilling life. Then you can too. There was, all it took was getting the right support and building and those skills and strategies. So definitely that have the courage to be vulnerable, and you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to be really, really scared. And guess what? Some people might not get you, but then they're not your people.
You will find. I'll strive to be like that boss you had.
Exactly.
What a great response.
Absolutely. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think, many organizations, I think, also should adopt, the policy with mental health and recognize the importance of it. Because if you have healthy employees, then you have really great workforce, you get great productivity from them as well. So that's one part of mental health. And many parts definitely involve the individual in itself, the families, the community in itself. So it's actually, when you look at it, it's all intertwined. There's no one function working on its own, but it's all functions working together at the end of the day to make sure that mental health is not gone unknown. It's not gone, forgotten or anything like that. So thank you so much for sharing those things with us.
I think sometimes we tend to compartmentalize our lives so much, right? And then this is when we come to a moment of crisis where those walls break down. And I think it's because in this environment, I act this way. With these people, I act this way.
We have different,
And so suddenly, I think when we're in moments of crisis, that all converges and we're not able to keep those compartments. And so I really will remember that story that you shared about your boss, because it's in every aspect of our lives where we have to think about how this courage is contagious, but also how do we look at what's best for ourselves, not just in this environment, in school, in home, in life, and with friends. So thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. And honestly, I think whether it's schools, colleges, universities, employment places, people need to wake up with mental health, especially in light of COVID. Mental health crisis was already projected as the second, biggest global burden of disease, according to WHO. Multiply that, COVID has been a catalyst. This is going to have massive impacts and massive sparks on mental health statistics. So I remember in Australia, mental illness and mental health cost the economy somewhere close to $43 million in lost productivity, absenteeism, and so forth. So you need to start waking up and treating this as a very urgent matter. It's the next frontier. It is the next crisis.
Yep.
And I think your proactive approach, is something that only recently I've really started to look at daily decisions for myself and others. For how to really, we can recognize that this pandemic and all of these changes to our life are going to have an impact. And I think as families and friends and students, these are the conversations that are critical to be having now and not waiting until 6 months or, a year from now. We're really working and self-checking, checking in with each other to see how are these lifestyle changes impacting us and others.
And I'll just quickly take a moment to thank you, Teva, and everyone at SEGI who's put this just from the bottom of my heart. As someone who went to university as a mental illness survivor myself, I am deeply grateful that people like you and institutions like SEGI take this so seriously and have the conversation. Trust me, I went to a very prestigious university, and something like this did not exist even 10 years ago. So I'm really grateful for the work you're doing. Thank you for that. Really, really proud and grateful for SEGI. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Farhana. Thank you for that. Yeah, we try our best. We try our best to do what we can and reach out to, especially our students. I mean, we have a lot of young people at our school, at our colleges and our universities, and we want to ensure that we do give them as much as we could to support them through this. So that's one of those initiatives that we try to, not just for our students and not just for our people, but also for everyone that needs to hear this today and don't feel isolated, don't feel alone in your struggles as much. To know that there are other people struggling and they have also found help, not just struggling, but they've also found help, because that's the message that we want to send out, right? So yeah, I want to continue this conversation to a little bit more, to understand that what was the most, I mean, we've discussed things that were not helpful, the stigmatization, the inability to talk about it, to freely express what we want to express, and it further basically put walls up around us so that we don't want to share anymore, so we just isolate ourselves in a way. Now I want to talk about what really helped in those situations. Now, Farhana, maybe you want to start sharing with what really truly helped and your recommendations as well.
Absolutely. So in no particular order, looking back at my journey, and my guess what, a journey of development and personal growth and healing is lifelong, right? We can never be perfect. It's always an ongoing
Definitely.
journey, right? And you
Yep.
uncover. So what, looking back at the worst of my mental illness journey, what helped the most, number one, was getting the treatment that I really needed. It's a medical condition, so I went to the people who were skilled and professional and had the knowledge and the tools.
Farhana, I want to stop you there. Now, before I just want to know, we want to know more about before you actually went to the professional. What prompted you? Because a lot of the time people have this challenge of going to the professional, right? So
Yes,
we want to know what prompted you. Yeah.
great call out. Actually, I didn't share that story, so just giving everyone a bit of a trigger heads up. This refers, I'm going to talk about the day that I lost try to make a suicide attempt. So please skip this section if this is something that distresses you, and keep in touch with Teva if you'd like someone to debrief after this. So my rock bottom, you have that rock bottom, right? Your absolute darkest moment. So I had that a couple of days before my 25th birthday, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. There's no point of me living, and I am just going to take my own life. And I had attempted it a few times before, but this time I'm like, nah, that's it. There really is no hope. And then as I was doing so, there was a voice inside me that said, no, you are going to fight this. So I called 000. And this is where the importance of frontline responders is so critical, because in the past I have had frontline responders, whether it's the hospital emergency staff or someone in the ambulance, kind of roll their eyes and even give you that attitude, that bad vibe. But this was the first time where the paramedic in that ambulance, he was, I would say, the first time that I had that trigger, that motivation, that no, this is enough. Like, I am actually going to do something about this now. I'm not going to live like this. What happened was I was in the ambulance and I kind of snapped out of it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I created all this drama and commotion, and I'm fine. I was just, having a bad day. And I feel so embarrassed and ashamed. And he just took my hand and he looked me in the eye and he said, in the kindest voice ever, said, Hannah, would you be apologizing today if you were in this ambulance for a broken bone or a heart attack? Mental health is absolutely no different. And that was my moment, my light bulb moment, Teva. And I'm like, yes, exactly. And in just with that one kind, accepting, non-judgmental sentence, he wiped away years of shame and stigma that I had attached to struggling with my mental health. And that was the first thing. So it only takes one person, and that person can be a frontline responder, it can be a teacher, a friend, a stranger on the internet. Trust me, there are people out there. Just because maybe your most closest one, they don't maybe get it, or doesn't mean there's no one else who might not. Exactly. So it only takes one person to say, this is real. You're not your mental illness. You're not defined by your mental illness. You're not defined by your struggles. You're defined by how you overcome them, and you can overcome them. And so when I finally got in touch with a psychologist and started therapy, it opened up my eyes to, because when you're depressed, you think you're the only one going through it. You think there's no one else who understands you. You're isolated. No one gets you, and you just want to be in a dark hole all by yourself. But then, along with individual therapy, I also got introduced to support groups, whether it was on Facebook, whether it was just group counseling sessions. And when you talk to people who have recovered or who are on a similar journey, that sense of community is so powerful. So seek out your tribe. trust me, there are people out there who will relate and who will not judge you, who will not shame you for what you're going through. The third thing that I feel was the ultimate expression of empowerment for me was being able to tell my story. So even throughout my treatment and everything, and this is a very personal decision, but my humble request is, if you have even an ounce of the courage, please share your story, because you have no idea who your story will inspire, who it will touch. As I said, courage is contagious. So when I first started talking about my mental health on social media, even if I was known for comedy, I had hundreds of people reach out to me going, oh my God, we can relate to what you're going through. Nobody's talking about it.
Relatability. Yeah. It's powerful.
Absolutely. I'm vulnerable. You look at my social media, I share my good days, I share my bad days. You know, I share the days I can't get out of bed and I haven't showered in 3 days. I share the days where I'm at the gym and I'm eating healthy. It's all very vulnerable and real. So that's my request, because once I started sharing my story, it gave me a sense of empowerment and control and liberation from shame. Because very often, and again, I'm not, saying you need to share your story. It's completely what you're comfortable with. But very often, a lot of the shame that we carry is very internal. Exactly. So when I tell my story with pride, with courage, and with my head held high, it automatically signals the same to the people around me. So those are the top things that I would suggest. Hope it was helpful.
Very powerful, Farhana. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure many people would find this relatable. Those who are contemplating to get help, those who are at that rock bottom space right now, it speaks to them. It's relatable to them, because sometimes you feel like, it's just therapy. No one's gonna get me. I can't access that. It's shameful. All these things will come over you, and you will feel completely blocked from getting help. But you need to understand that sometimes like you said, it takes one person, and sometimes it's a little bit of push for yourself, and to see that, let me try this at least. It's an option. At the end of the day, look at it as an option point of view. It's an option. I can try this. And then I can decide whatever I need to decide. So at least give it a try. And that is the most important thing, I think, the important message that we want to send out today as well. Now, for Nancy, what would you suggest, or what are the things that you have found helpful in your journey?
So I think for me, one great thing I have to remember is that self-care isn't selfish. Do you know? Because I can tend to make a task list and just go down that task list until I've exhausted myself and until I have nothing left to give. And for many, many years, anytime that I would spend caring for me would feel like I was taking away from someone else. And so I've really learned that self-care is so individual, right? And that we have to talk about self-care strategies so that people can find what the mix that works for them, and recognize that when they take care of themselves, they're better able to give of themselves, and they're better able to meet some of their desired goals.
Exactly.
But I also have found that sometimes I think what works for me self-care wise should work for everybody, right? And so I've had to not only engage with people on what works for you? Let me try that. Does that work for me? No, that does not work for me. And I've given the example before of, getting that advice to go running. Running's the thing. It makes me feel great. It's perfect self-care. And every time I run, it's not good for me. And so I just always have to remind myself that when I care for myself, I am better aware of my mental health and how to be proactive in caring for myself, and then can do more for others, which is often my desired goal.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Because what Nancy said is, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? If you don't love yourself enough, if you don't take care of yourself enough, how are you going to love and take care of other people in a sense, right? So you need to ensure that you are equipped with what you need first. It's definitely not selfish, because many times, I've heard it too many times when, in my sessions as well, when people tell you, you're not supposed to be doing that, but you're supposed to be taking care of someone else right now. But how do you do that when you don't take care of yourself first, right? So self-care is not selfish, and that is a message we need to send out to everybody. Every single person needs to hear this, that self-care is not selfish. On top of what both of you have mentioned really great strategies and your experiences, that how you got out and how you got treatment for yourself. On top of that, seeking a professional is true. But on the other hand, when you do not have a therapist to look for at that point of time, us as individuals, us as human beings, what we can do is we can start by being kind. The simplest, most easiest thing that we can do for each other is just start by being kind first. As Farhana mentioned in her experience, that one kind person turned it around for her. So that is, we could be that person for somebody else, unknowingly sometimes.
Amazing.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think these
So,
multi-generational conversations are really critical too, because so often I'm in circles with friends who are older, and we will just be able to sit down and, people will be like, those kids that way, they don't understand. And then when I'm in groups of, younger people, they'll be like, those parents, those adults, they don't get it. And so I believe one great strategy is just continue to dialogue, not just with people who are in our circle, but to push ourselves into other circles to break some of those barriers to these conversations.
Yep. The stigmas, and we can break, like, it doesn't mean an adult cannot relate to a child. It's just about giving them the space and time and the listening ear sometimes, and they would trust you with that, right? So before we move on into the question and answer, and before we towards the closing of this session, I do want to I just want to just put it out there that help is available for each and everyone that is struggling. Help is available. You don't have to suffer alone. Now, for Malaysia, we have Befriend Us. It is a 24-hour hotline, and I think people should become more aware of that. And if you need, you can Google. They have the number that you can call. So 24 hours service. Just give them a call if you need to talk to somebody. We all need someone to listen to us without the judgments, without the stigma, without the shame and all that. And it's anonymous, so you can do that for yourself. First thing that you can do is reach out. You need to reach out. You need to ask. And if you cannot do that, find someone in your circle. It could be a family member, it could be a friend. Reach out to someone you can trust, and that they have their best interest in your heart, and they won't be judgmental. So these are the basic things, or the first things that you can do for yourself when you are struggling, in such times. Right. Now, I do want to show you guys the message from Farhana that she has for everyone. She says, mental health is as real and as important as physical health. Own your story. Farhana, would you like to quickly recap on this?
Absolutely. Anytime you or anyone around you find yourself second guessing the importance or the urgency of your mental health, issue or state, ask yourself. I think this is a great litmus test. That would I be responding with the same bias or attitude if today I had a fever or a cold, or essentially basically a physical illness. If I was physically ill, I would rush to a doctor. I would rush to Google and see what's going on and try to get the help and support I need and try to treat it. Mental health is exactly the same. It's as urgent, as real, and as important as physical health. And the second point that I would try to drive home is own your story. Be proud of it. Share your story. Write your story. It's not up to someone else to shame you or attach labels to it. Be proud of all the ups and downs. That's what adds to the richness of your life. That's what builds your resilience. So own every up and own every down. And I think it's truly when you start to own your story, do you start healing from any shame or any stigma that you absorb and you've carried and believed in. So hold your head high. There is nothing to be ashamed of.
Sharing. Thank you, Farhana, because acceptance, owning yourself, owning your story is about acceptance, and acceptance takes you to opens up so many opportunities for you, because that is the first and utmost step towards recovery. Owning your story. I would like to say this as well on top of what Farhana said. Whatever that you're going through, any mental conditions that you're going through, is just one part of yourself. There are so many different parts to yourself, and the mental condition that you're going through is just one part which you can seek help for, which you can change, which you can learn to manage. It's not something that you're going to be stuck with for the rest of your life without it changing. It can change with the right treatment, with the right help. It can change, and that is you can also, continue to own that part of you as well, because that is a powerful way to change, your narrative, your life as well. Now we're going to move on to Miss Nancy. Nancy says, talking about mental health is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself and others. Nancy, would you like to recap on this?
I think that anyone who attended this webinar had this great opportunity to talk about mental health. And when I think about that, I know that you can often go out in the world, say the webinar ended, and close the door, go to bed, and not think about it again. But I would really challenge everybody to think about in your daily life as you go through tomorrow and the next day, to think about where are places where I can personally, and I love the idea of that courage, right? Where can I have the courage to have these conversations? Because one thing we learned today, and I think goes with this point, is that one person can make a difference. I'm not there to counsel everybody, but I can be there to listen to everybody. I can be there to be kind to everybody. And we've learned today that that clearly makes a difference.
So much, Nancy. Okay. Thank you so much, Nancy, for that. Yes, talking about mental health, we are trying to destigmatize it, we're normalizing it, because there's no shame in talking about mental health and your experiences. Yep. So right. So let's move on to question and answer. So we'll open you can type your questions in the comments section so we can see which question we can highlight to our audience today. And let's see if there are any questions today. Right. From Emmeline, Shauna Tham. Hi. Okay. On the opposite spectrum of suppressing emotions, I know people who allow their diagnosis to control their lives, almost always using their mental illness as an excuse to not function to their best ability and get away with things on a regular basis. How can you differentiate between someone who is genuinely unable to carry out their daily tasks due to their mental health and someone who thinks they can't live normally just because they've been given a diagnosis now? Okay, our speakers, do anyone want to address this question?
Yes, Nancy, if it's okay with you, I'd actually like to jump in, if that's okay. Emmeline, I don't know you, but I would love to believe that you definitely meant well with this question, and it seems like it's something that genuinely you care about. So thank you for asking. Your intention is obviously, to further the conversations. I really do thank you for asking that question. But what I would like for Emmeline and anyone reading the question to do, take a step back and let's look at the language that's being used and some of the assumptions behind that language. So firstly, she says, I know people who allow their diagnosis to control their lives, which is implying that people with a mental illness and a diagnosis have some sort of choice, which again goes back to the assumption that this is in your head and you're doing this to yourself. Right? It's like saying, oh, you've got a fractured leg, so it's your choice to limp. Right? So anyone with a mental illness does not make a choice. The diagnosis itself, that's the way it works. Their brain wiring, their chemistry, it's making them behave like that. It's not necessarily a conscious
wanting to behave. Yeah,
exactly. No one is wanting that. And trust me, that person who is going through the mental illness feels the worst. Trust me, they already feel 10 times worse than you and I can ever criticize them for. So that's the first assumption that I'd like to call out. Secondly, in her question, she said using their mental illness as an excuse to not function to their best ability and get away with things on a regular basis. Again, it's implying that this person has control and a choice, an active choice, and has this kind of intent to use mental illness as some sort of manipulation, which goes back to original stigma, which is you're using this to get attention. So we really need to start paying attention to the language that we use when we're talking about mental illness, because all of this webinar will mean nothing if we don't start to reflect on our own bias and our own attitudes and the assumptions behind that attitude. And lastly, she said, how can we judge whether someone is, they can't live normally just because they've been given a diagnosis. Again, the language, just because they've been given a diagnosis. Will we talk like this about a person who's been diagnosed with cancer? No, we're not, right? So a diagnosis is a diagnosis. When we say, oh, it's just a diagnosis, unfortunately, what we're doing is we're trivializing, we're dismissing your challenge. And again, it's adding to shame. And to answer her main question, which Emily goes, how can you differentiate between someone who is genuinely unable to carry out their daily tasks due to their mental health and someone who thinks that they just can't normally live because of their diagnosis? The only question or comment I would make to this is, who are we to judge that? Who am I to make a call for that person? That person's reality is that they cannot function normally. And I have to take that at face value. I have to trust that. I am no one to gaslight them or decide for them whether they're sick enough to do something or not.
I think one thing that I would also point out is that often if you haven't experienced something, it's very hard to empathize, you know, and I lost my parents at a very young age. And so when I would talk about grief, I had many friends who just couldn't relate, right? And so now when they look back at some things they said as they're encountering similar circumstances, they're realizing that they didn't have empathy. And so whenever I'm thinking about somebody else, I'm always looking through the lens of, I might not understand this, but am I being empathetic? And I think, again, that goes back to why these conversations are hard, because often when we look at other people in many, many circumstances, it's easy to make assumptions instead of saying, like, I haven't experienced that, but I want to understand it. Help me.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, if you don't know what to say to that person, or maybe you don't want to engage in that, just a personal boundary, because not everyone has the capacity or emotional bandwidth to support someone going through mental illness, then you can say, look, I can't solve it for you, but I'm here to listen. Know that, I'm here with you in this discomfort. And if you would like my support, maybe I can, tell you about some resources I know of, or just know that I wish you well. Even just basic kindness. No one is actually expecting you to solve their problem for them. They just want some kindness and acceptance and non-judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of our speakers, but I also want to add another perspective to this question. I mean, in my line of work, I also see family members who deal with other people who are going through, conditions as such. Now, as what Farhana mentioned, as what Nancy mentioned, yes, we need to empathize, we need to function from the empathy point of view. We also cannot say, I mean, it's a diagnosis. It's not just as simple as just a diagnosis. It's not because they want to behave that way. They basically sometimes do not have control of how their mind is working at the point of time, their emotions are working at the point of time. So they basically just don't know how to contain it at the point of time. And the behavior matches to all those things. That's what you see on the outside. But from a family member's point of view, it can be very frustrating for that family member in itself to live with someone with depression or conditions like that. So now, what the family member can do is that learn. You got to educate yourself much more on how these conditions make these people behave, make these people think, make these people function, basically. Because one main thing that we need to understand is that mental health conditions take away functionality from the individuals in itself. Not that they don't want to be functionable, not that they don't want to be useful, but it takes it away. It makes it difficult for them to function normally, as how you and I would function given otherwise, right? So we need to educate ourselves. If it's too much for you, you need to seek some resources for yourself as well, so that you can manage your emotions. Because empathy, sympathy, all that can turn sometimes into resentment, sometimes into burdensome. It can turn into a different kind of an emotion. So sometimes when you're too consuming too much of these things, it can also affect you. So I hope you also seek out the support that you need. Maybe you're dealing with this in your own way and you don't know how to deal with this. So you're taking it out on this other person, or you're seeing that the other person is behaving or wanting to just behave that way because of a diagnosis. So I hope you're able to seek out the education and the support that you need, so that you're also able to become a more understanding person in a way, given in this condition.
Absolutely.
Any last words from our speakers today before we end our session?
I am just really thankful to have been here, and I agree with Farhana that Segi's work in advocacy and building relationships is great. There are hours more that we could have discussed, and I would have loved to hear much more from both of you, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Nancy. Farhana, any last words from you?
Again, echoing Nancy's sentiments, deeply grateful as a mental health advocate, as a mental illness survivor, that you are creating spaces like these to have these conversations. Our next generations are not going to be struggling with the same things our parents struggled with, like putting food and water and safety and shelter. The next frontier for a lot of us will be mental health. So it's great that we're looking at conversations that build resilience, that build coping mechanisms, and remove the stigma around mental health. And to anyone listening to this, as Nancy said, it's okay to be not okay. It's not the shame is not for you to carry, and own your story, and just look after your mental health exactly with the same urgency and care that you would look after your physical health. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers today, Farhana Muna from Monetic and Arna, and as well Ms. Nancy Bartos from Hope Travels. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences, so valuable. And I hope people out there, the listeners and the audience today, manage to get something out of this, and we all can do much more to be part of a world that's better, and we can make it better for everyone else. That concludes our session for today's webinar. And I would like to take this opportunity to highlight that we have an upcoming webinar tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. And it's titled Early Childhood Care and Education, Insights for Safety and Psychosocial Wellbeing in the ECCE settings. That means the Early Childhood Care setting. This is for tomorrow, and our speakers will cover topics in relation. There are 3 different speakers, and they will cover topics in relation to childcare, and how do we maintain a psychosocial well-being in terms of given the pandemic that we're going in right now. So if you are interested, please can all go to this link to register now. Okay, I hope you have registered for a webinar tomorrow, and do join our Telegram group for more free webinars and updates. So any webinars that we're having will update through this particular Telegram group, and you can join through the QR code or through the link that is displayed on your screen. And that brings us to the end of our today's session. On behalf of SEGI Group of Colleges, I would like to thank all of you for joining our session today, and stay connected and see you next time. Thank you very much.